So welcome, Per. We're just having a nice discussion, and we'd like to learn about your approach to posology and your, hear about your teachers and the people who influenced you in your homeopathic journey. So we would just, I just asked you, what would you like to talk about? And we sort of just started rolling into talking about your teachers. So let's, please do tell us about your influences in homeopathy.
Well, the first influence was actually Vitulkas. And I followed Vitulkas in a lot of seminars every year for 10 years at Aloysius and in London and Amsterdam and Celle and everywhere I could participate.
Yes.
So that helped me a lot in my knowledge as such, but not enough in my understanding. And that I found with Masi. He helped me a lot. His philosophy helped me to get a much better understanding of remedies and what's remedy specific and what's just symptoms. And yeah, from Vitulkas, I used the repertory a lot. But no matter how I analyzed the case, yeah, the big polycrests came up always.
Yeah.
And yeah, the polycrest can help a lot of cases, but not all cases.
No.
And especially as we talked about last time, the patients with weak vital force and deep pathology, you need to be much more specific in where you hit with the remedy. And that approach I found from Masi, how to do that.
So how to discern what the kind of center point of the suffering is for the person and match that with the remedy, or
yeah, it's the same process with the patient as it is to analyze a remedy and to distill all the thousands of symptoms into themes up through the hierarchy of man and see where does it end. What is the red thread up through the hierarchy to the leading themes, the main themes at the bottom of it all, and from which all the symptoms can be traced down through the hierarchy to a single physical symptom. And that you can do with a remedy and you can do with a patient.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's almost, the process almost mirrors whether you're studying the patient or studying the remedy, and as long as you use the same process for each, then you're going to find a good match.
Yeah. So that's an important issue, and the other important thing I learned from Masi was the miasmatic dynamic, where the understanding I got from Hahnemann about the miasms was very static, where Masi's understanding of the miasms more focus on each miasmatic phase is a pattern of reaction, how we react to our sore spots. And as long as we just suffer from that life is difficult, love is difficult, and so on, as long as it's just suffering, we are in the thoracic miasm.
Yep.
And in the thoracic miasm, we only see functional disturbances.
Yeah.
No organic changes.
Yes.
Only functional. And as long as we can just suffer, we remain there.
Yes. Yes.
But at some point, most people progress more advanced and react to the suffering. Tired of suffering, trying to do something about it. And there are different things we can do. One of them is to try to blow up our ego and say, I can handle this. I'm good, I am clever, I have no problems. Love is no problems, girls are no problems, and so on. It's a bluff, but it works.
Yeah.
Man does what works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another approach where the mechanism is to blow up our ego and pretend that we have no problem with it, we can handle it. And that gives a nice feeling, as long as you can convince yourself and your surroundings that you are on top of it.
Yeah.
It's a lie, but it works.
Yeah.
Then we are in what Masi calls the ecotrophic miasm,
Okay.
which corresponds to Hahnemann's psychosis.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But the mechanism is to blow up yourself and to trump. Is trump's the right word?
And to what? Sorry.
To say you can handle it,
Yeah.
even though it's not completely true.
Yes. The bluff.
The bluff, yeah, it's a bluff, and it works, and it's nice, and it's what, as I see it, at least in Denmark, that's what the society encourages, that behavior.
Very much.
Civilization, if you suffer, you're weak, no good.
Yes, you have to learn that compensation early on in society now, I think. Yeah.
But when we are in that miasmatic phase, bluffing, lying, actually, we are in the ecotrophic phase, and that sooner or later, depending on the strength of your vital force, will manifest itself in organic changes. Then you see physical pathology. Not random places, but in precisely those organs and those localities which corresponds to the core, the leading themes of the person corresponding to the remedy.
Yes.
So that's one approach, that's one way of reacting to our sore spots, our weak points. And the mechanism is much similar to, how can I say, everything in life on this earth, on this planet, is relative. Nothing is absolute. We have, that's one of the things which people say against Masi. Masi spoke in terms of religion.
Yes.
And that a lot of people don't like.
Yes, that's not so popular now.
He says we have God and we have man. So I try not to use the religious terminology, but speak in terms of relative and absolute.
I see.
And all our abilities are relative.
Yes.
We can be relatively good at something.
Yes.
Not absolute, perfect, divine. Only God can do that, according to Masi.
Yes.
We can do it relatively.
Yes.
But if we want to blow up our ego and claim that I'm on top of the world, I'm the best, then we say ideally, then we go for the ideal value instead of the relative value.
Yeah.
And say only the absolute, the ideal, is good enough. It sounds fine.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you go for that, you say only the absolute is good enough. The truth is, you, I, no person is able to do that.
Right.
We can do it relatively well, not absolute.
Yeah.
Our abilities are relative, but if we go for the absolute and say the relative is not good enough,
yeah,
and that's not possible, you have nothing. You have a hole where actually your abilities would be able to fill out, but if you reject the relative ability and claim to be able to do it ideally absolute, then you have a problem.
Yes.
And that's what happens in the egotropic, in psychosis.
Yes. And that would comes at a great cost to your energy over time, striving for that absolute.
Yes, you have to pretend that you have the absolute ability on that area.
Right. Do you feel there's always a pretense, or does it start with a striving towards the ideal or the absolute?
Yeah.
And then it perhaps leads, or in some cases leads to pretense as the ability to keep up that performance wanes. Yeah.
In your own, the image of yourself, how you see yourself, how you feel, and what you're trying to convince others.
Yeah.
You are who you are. So that's one mathematic phase.
Yeah.
And the third, corresponding to Hahnemann's syphilitic miasm, is on exactly the same point, the same ability you suffered from in the solar, and tried to make absolute ideal in the egotropic phase. When you go to the syphilitic miasm, which Masi calls the
Luetic. Yeah.
Lytic means dissolve.
Yeah.
That's where you give up.
Yeah.
You tried, but it's too much. And you give up to be able to do that. And then you can either go in the egolytic phase where you blame yourself.
Okay, yeah.
Knock yourself on the head of not being good enough, or you can project it to your surroundings, which Masi calls the alterolytic phase.
Okay.
Blame other people.
Yeah.
It's their fault that I did not succeed. So that's the miasmatic phases.
Yeah.
Phases. And when you have the analysis of a remedy and have the leading motives where it all connects up to, then you can see all the different pictures it gives if you are on top of it in the egotropic, or if you have given up exactly that, then there's a hole there where they do nothing, not even the relatively little things they could do. They totally give up on that point, not on everything else, but on that point, which is remedy specific. The point is remedy specific.
Would it be useful to look at one of the remedies in your book from the hypothesis collection to just as an example, if you had one in mind? Sorry for putting you on the spot. We don't have to, but it would be interesting.
You can take an example like a potion, which most people know.
Yeah.
According to Masi, it all ends up in the leading themes of the archetype of the father.
Yes.
All the ability. Oh.
So I was going to show everyone your book in Radar Opus. So Lycopodium, you said.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, don't let me stop you. Carry on, but I thought I would show everybody how it looks in the book, in the program. Yeah.
The archetype of the father, all the qualities we connect with the archetype, the father, the masculinity, the responsibility, the strength, and so on.
Yes.
That's the abilities which Lycopodium centers about.
Yeah.
So in the Zoic phase, the functional Zoic phase, he suffers whenever he comes into a situation where that is required. Where he has to be strong, be brave, be all the masculine abilities.
Yes.
Because that's his problem, because he demands on himself subconsciously to have that ability absolute. And he feels in the situations he's not good enough. So he suffers from all those situations where those abilities are required.
Okay.
Because he feels he's not good enough.
Yeah.
Actually, he can be as good as anybody else, relatively good. But relatively good is not good enough on that point.
Yeah.
So that's where he suffers. When he goes to the egotrophic phase, then he blows up his ego and he is the macho man with dark glasses and big muscles and really the image of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, actually, if you read Vitulka's Essence of Lycopodium,
Mm-hmm.
it's very much the ecotrophic Lycopodium that Vitulka has spotted and describes perfectly well.
I see. Yes.
But that's and Lycopodium works fine when the patient is in the ecotrophic miasm.
Yeah.
In that phase.
I see. So it's adding more nuance to
Exactly.
understanding. Yeah.
Exactly. The same remedy has a different picture in each miasmatic phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the picture as such, it's a totally different personality in the ecotrophic than in the solid, than in the lytic phase. It's a different picture, but
the lytic phase is egolysis.
It revolves about exactly the same abilities.
Yeah. A complete denial of his human fertility and productivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that dynamic which I find very important, at least from my understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, that certainly makes. I find Lycopodium a difficult remedy because it always repertorises very well if the person has some sexual dysfunction or some digestive complaints, and sometimes you can be tempted to prescribe because it repertorises so well.
Yeah, it fits all the symptoms.
Yeah, so many symptoms.
But does it fit the cause of the symptoms?
No, but I do have a patient who does very well on the Lycopodium, and it makes sense what you've written there about him. Wanting to embody like masculinity to a perfect degree. Yeah, and not being able to, of course.
Yeah. And it's also typical for Lycopodium women that the way they act in the family, they are the father. They don't want to be the mother. They want to be the one in charge with the trousers on.
Yes. Interesting. And there's
Then of course in the lytic phase, that's exactly what they give up. Surrender. And they become almost feminine. The male Lycopodium in the lytic phase become almost feminine.
Right.
Because there's a hole where the relative masculinity ought to be. Right.
It's interesting given that there's such a movement towards non-binary, people don't want to identify with a male or feminine sex anymore. You know about this? It's just in young people now, they're not wanting to say I'm a man or a woman. They want to be referred to as they. It's a non-binary identification.
Yeah.
But do you see maybe Lycopodium is part of the Lycopodium archetype is in play with what's going on? I hadn't thought of that. But I mean, let's talk about your new book on posology, and you spoke a little about it last week, so apologies if you have to repeat yourself, but we'd love to know about your approach to using the Hahnemannian 5th and 6th edition of the organon, and that approach to potency.
Yeah. So you mean we disregard what we spoke last week?
Well, we can cover the same ground of what we spoke about last week for sure. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to know about your experiences moving from the watch and wait centesimal scale, into, using liquid potencies, for all of your patients, I think now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah. So if you can tell us, what was it that made you transition from the watch and wait high potency Kentian approach to the Hahnemannian 5th, 6th edition approach?
The same reason that Hahnemann himself changed from the C scale to the Q potencies.
Yeah.
Where Hahnemann's experience was that about 80% of his patients worked fine with the C potencies.
Yeah.
And he said 80% was in the euphoric phase.
Yes.
And then he had the last 20%, which his experience was he could not help them with the C potencies because their vital force was too weak for the potency needed to hit the course. So the high potencies, which were indicated, gave two troublesome aggravations.
Yeah.
And the lower potencies, which the vital force could handle, was too low to cure.
Yeah.
Not reach the core of the problem.
Yeah.
So he landed between two chairs with the 20%.
Yes.
That's why he tried to find another way of helping them.
Yeah.
As he very much described in the 10 pages long footnote from paragraph 246 in the 5th edition. There he describes it very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so back to your question, what brought me to replicate that? Whenever I have problems with patients, not one, but several, and I can see there's a deeper problem, something I don't understand, then I go to Hahnemann and wait. I'm sure he experienced the same at some time, and I'm sure he found a solution to it. And he did by he experienced a lot with the number of the strokes for the potency, and it didn't solve that problem. Then he experimented a lot with the dilution, the ratio, where C is 1 to 100.
Yeah.
And he increased that to he also wrote that the bigger amount of water you dissolve a potency in, the more effective that remedy will be. So he increased the volume he dissolved the remedy in.
Yeah.
And it made the remedy more effective, but at the same time, the dose is smaller. So the load on the vital force is lower. Makes it easier for the life force, for the vital force to handle.
To accept it. Yeah. Yeah.
And Yeah, to make a long story short, the last 3 years of Hahnemann from 1940 to 1943, he used all the potencies from the lowest to the highest C's and the Q potencies. He used them in exactly the same way. Dosed them in dilution only. And he used the C potencies with the same pathology as previously the Q potencies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then I tried to do exactly that. And the experience was so good that now it's very seldom I use a dry dose.
Yes.
It happens with some patients where I have confirmed the remedy is correct. And it's, for some people, it's problematic to repeat the dose regularly.
Yeah.
Where it's much easier to give them a dry pill and see you in 9 months. So there I can give a dry dose to those people, but never repeat a dry dose. Only as the first dose. Otherwise, I'll only use dilutions.
Right.
And one of the big advantages for me, anyhow, I very often start with the wrong remedy. And with the wait and see method from the fourth edition, it takes at least a month before I can be sure that you go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a dilution, usually it takes maximum 1 week to be sure. And what I see is that when I give a dilution, the response is much quicker.
Yeah.
And what I have noticed is that within 1 to 2 days, the vital force reacts with indications on the posology.
Yeah.
Only thereafter comes indication from the remedy. So the primary action says something about the pathology, if the dose was okay or too big.
Okay. Right.
So that I know after 1 day, and it's,
yeah.
Then of course I have to tell the patient to give me feedback.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
If it's a small reaction, I let it pass and it disappears quickly.
Yeah.
And then we see if the secondary reaction is starting. And of course, if it does that, fine, let it run as long as it does.
Yeah.
As long as there's progressive amelioration, you don't touch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you give too big a dose, you will have a much stronger reaction, aggravation.
Yeah.
And that can actually block in the sense that the vital force uses all its resources to overcome the overdose.
Okay.
And there's nothing left to the curative response.
To react. So when you give too big a dose, is that that's not necessarily too high a potency,
No.
but too much of the actual remedy, the liquid? Yeah. Yeah.
And what I have experienced is that the sensitivity for remedy increases during the process.
Mm-hmm.
So what was okay as a test doses, the first doses, very quickly becomes too much.
Right.
Starts to give reactions, aggravations.
Yep.
So what I do today is I actually never repeat the same dose.
Okay.
I downgrade the dose every repetition.
Huh. Well.
And when I compare with when I don't, and they just take, if the test dose was okay, and continue with that dose at every repetition, compared to when I downgrade every time, the process goes much faster.
Huh. So if we take a practical example, let's say your test dose was 1 drop of Q1 into, say, 6 tablespoons of water. Is that how you would do it? And then stir the water and take 1 teaspoon? Or why don't you give us an example of how you would downgrade test dose?
That's one thing. You will see it's a big difference between the first edition of the Posology, which you have seen, and the third edition, where I have added a chapter of low practical transcendence.
Okay, yes.
Because I want to understand. I don't want just to repeat myself when I see there are problems.
Right.
You won't find it there.
No, so it's not in this version, but I just wanted to show people watching that is it the first edition of your book or second? So that's
the first.
This is the first edition of Homeopathic Posology written by Per.
Yeah.
And you can see here that he outlines the teachings of the organon and then going into a chapter on dilution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying at the end now there's more practical examples about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, I have deviated from what Hahnemann did.
Yes.
For good and for worse.
I'm sure Hahnemann would have deviated from what he did too.
Yeah. But when I compare with Hahnemann's patients, my patients overreact strongly to the doses Hahnemann used.
Yeah.
So I wanted to reduce the dose.
Yes.
And therefore, I use, where Hahnemann used a 100 milliliter bottle or 200 milliliter, I use a 10 milliliter.
Yeah.
10 milliliter dropper bottle.
Okay.
And give the test dose from that.
Okay. Yeah.
Usually, I depending on the intensity of the symptoms, the intensity of the etiology, if I know what that was, I give the bottle a number of strokes.
Yeah.
The more intense the symptoms are, the more intense the etiology was, the more strokes.
Okay.
And then 1 drop from the bottle in an empty glass.
Yeah.
300 milliliter glass. Fill up with water.
Okay.
Empty it. Fill up from the tap. Empty it. And so on to the 5th glass.
Oh, okay. You do 5 cups. Wow.
That's where, by experience, I usually start. Originally, I started with a drop from the bottle directly on the tongue.
Yeah.
And if that was too much, I went to the 1st glass.
Okay. Yeah.
But after seeing too many aggravations, I usually start with the 5th glass.
I see. Wow.
And then let it run as long as there's progression, amelioration.
Yeah.
And when the things which got better starts to stagnate or fall back, then repeat.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before I repeat, I downgrade the bottle.
Okay.
Originally, I tried to, if 5 glasses, if the 5th glass was too much, then the 6th glass or the 7th glass.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It was as if the structure of the potency got too weak and nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pretend to be able to explain it, but by experience, I stopped with 5 glasses.
Okay. Yeah.
And if I want to downgrade the dose from there, I do it with a bottle.
Okay.
So that means the second dose, I empty the bottle completely,
Mm-hmm.
fill it up from the tap,
Yeah.
empty it again, and
Yeah.
fill up 2/3. And that's the bottle I use for the second dose.
I see. Interesting.
The aim of the downgrade is to make the impact on the life force smaller, to avoid aggravations. If I just emptied the bottle and fill it up and gave that, it would be exactly the same dose, just potentized 1 step up.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
That's why I do it in 2 steps.
Yeah.
Actually, I copied that from Hahnemann's procedure when making the Q potencies.
Right.
When Hahnemann makes the Q potencies, he does it in 2 steps, 1 to 50,000 in 2 steps. One part of the remedy, 500 drops, just dissolve.
Yeah.
Not succus, only dissolve.
Yes.
And then 1 drop from that to 100 drops of water, and then succus.
Right.
So he does it in 2 steps. So that's what I copied in the way I downgrade.
Okay.
In 2 steps. 1 step of only dilution.
Yeah.
With no succussion, only dilution.
Yeah.
And then 1 step which, when they take the remedy, they strike the bottle.
Interesting.
That's a potentizing.
Right. And is this for the most sensitive patients, or for most, for the 10%, or more for the 90% of your patients?
It's more for the 90%.
Right. And that goes back to what we talked about last week, because it was very interesting. You said, Hahnemann said 80% psoric miasm, but today, things have shifted miasmatically.
Yes.
That's the psoric.
Or 80% are either in the igotropic or in the lytic phase.
Yeah.
With weaker vital force.
Yeah.
And my aim is to bring them from the lytic to the igotropic to the psoric phase.
Yes. Back to just regular suffering.
Yeah, back to the suffering. But by doing that, actually, if you see the person as a weight, a balancing weight, where you have the problem, the sore spot, the etiology, whatever, on one scale, and the life force, the vital force, is the balance master.
Yeah.
Which job it is to always have balance. So when there's a cause, it has to put counterweights on the other scale in the form of symptoms. So there's balance. And if your remedy can remove that problem, then it gets to life, and the life force is getting very busy of restoring balance by removing the counterweight to the symptoms. So they just disappear by themselves.
Thank you.
So only aim on the cause, not on the symptoms.
Yeah, I see. And the cause is more typically looking at the themes and the miasmatic influence as well.
Yeah, because in principle, all the physical symptoms people come with are only a physical manifestation of what goes on between their ears.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say there was one prescription I made of Centris where I read your chapter. And, it fitted this guy absolutely perfectly. And it worked well for him. He wasn't very good at following up, I must admit. I was still a student at the time, and he was my neighbor, but he had suffered whilst in the army from dilatation of the heart, which was one of the reasons for looking up snakes and Centris in particular. But actually that's the wrong one, isn't it? There was something around the sexuality in this remedy that you mentioned, which was just fit in perfectly. See if I can find it. You can see here I've made some additions to synthesis as well. Yeah. Naked and exposed to others. Let's see. It was from Masi. Interest rejects man's normal sexuality and reproductive function. He rejects sexuality as he does not want to reproduce. Yeah. Yes, that's pretty much what he said.
What you recognized.
And he's homosexual, so yeah. He said he was too scarred coming out of his mother's uterus, or that he never wanted to experience one again. Something like that. Yeah. So I want to thank you for taking the time to meet and discuss posology. There's always more one could ask about potency, and I certainly have had a couple of patients where my typical approach of starting with LM1 for a sensitive patient proved too much for him. So this was in one drop, I think 8 succussions, 1 drop into a glass of maybe 8 tablespoons, and then 1 teaspoon from the first glass. And it was too much. Really aggravated him. He has autoimmune problems and allergies, so very allergic to medicine, and obviously to a very what you'd think was a very minute dose. So I thought, and then he didn't come back. So I was thinking I should have perhaps gone with 12C and gone with 1 teaspoon from the second glass, but perhaps I should be thinking for such patients, 3rd glass, 4th, or even 5th glass, like you're doing. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, what I've seen a lot of cases where the aggravation blocked for the first shift response,
Yeah.
at least for a very long time. And that's one of the reasons why the process goes much faster with the dilution. The life force does not have to use all the resources on overdose.
Right. Yeah.
And when you downgrade the dose in dilution to what fits the life force, the improvement starts right away. Instead of all the aggravation from overdose. It's enough if it's the wrong remedy, but if it's also in an overdose, it takes a lot of vital force.
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, so thank you very much. I'll
You're welcome.
yeah, pleasure speaking with you.